Welcome to our Words in Progress series, where we get a mini lesson on writing from experts in the field.
Yes, and today we will be talking about endings of the story, specifically the resolution and denouement, or versus denouement.
I see that you prepared the script so that you got to use your French again.
Yeah.
About every other episode, that seems to somehow happen. Anyway, with us today discussing endings and denouement is Elena Taylor, who I'm sure our listeners will remember from last season. We featured her twice. One, we got to talk to her in a Corks and Conversation about her book and her writing, All We Buried. And then we also did a individual episode where we paired food and wine with this great read.
Yes, definitely go back and check it out. You can see all her credentials or hear all her credentials, which are many. Besides, having fun talking to us, Elena is also an editor and she gives workshops on writing. And so we're really, really happy that she agreed to give us a lesson today. So welcome, Elena.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. And I will warn you all in advance, I will occasionally look angelic because I randomly have the sun out here in Western Washington, which is very rarely true. But I have this light beaming in on me. So we'll do the appropriate,
Yeah, you have to enjoy it while you can, right?
It makes you look even more knowledgeable.
Yeah. Or you could do like weird stuff and be like, mysterious.
I kind of pop in and out of it.
That's awesome.
Okay, so just a little background. Elena's been doing these Zoom workshops most Wednesdays that I've been going to, and I'm such a big fan because they, keep me going, and it's so stressful. So it's kind of a little nudge every week. And recently she talked about endings, and particularly the resolution and the denouement. And I found this real enlightening. And so she described the topic in a good way, made me see the difference, which I didn't really understand before. And so, Elena, can you explain this difference to us?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. And I love that this was a topic that interested you, because I do think it's so incredibly important, but also something that sort of gets ignored in a lot of sort of writers' workshops and even, writing books and things like that. It's sort of like, you get to that finish line and you're so exhausted, you don't want to think too much about it, right? So I want to break it down just a little bit. And again, this is how I see things, so this is to take it for what it is, which is my opinion, but this is how I see things working. So the first off is I want to step back just slightly and say that for me, the climax takes place in 3 parts. And so I see the climax as the lead in, the build, and the resolution. So we're going to talk specifically today about the difference between resolution and denouement, but I want to start with having a clear understanding of climax. So these 3 parts, the lead in is when the protagonist is facing sort of their greatest obstacles, the stakes are the highest, and their super objective becomes clear. And that's sort of the lead in. So as those 3 things come together, that leads us into the climax happening. Because remember, especially when you're talking about book length, but even a novella or a long short story, the climax is not going to take place in a couple sentences. It's going to be a chapter. Right. It's going to be 2 chapters. If it's a movie, it might be 15 minutes. Like, it isn't just a one-line thing. So we have this lead in as those things happen. Then we have the build. And the build to me is as we see how that conflict is going to play out. So if you think about a novel or a film or a short story as having this one central conflict which is driving throughout, you have all these other little ones that build into it, but that you have sort of one single conflict. So the build here is as we as readers or viewers start to see how that conflict is going to resolve. And so that's the build. So we've led in. Things have become clear, obstacles are big, stakes are high, super objective is clear. We see the build and we go, I see how this is going to come out. Then as we actually experience that outcome, that's our resolution. So the resolution to me is the final component of the climax. It is where we see how the big question that the book has asked is answered. It's how is it a comedy or is it a tragedy, right? Is this a happy ending or a sad ending? Does, he get the girl? Does he not get the girl? Does she, win the Nobel Prize, not win the Nobel Prize? Does this character achieve what they wanted or not? Or do they achieve something else, which they find out is better? That one driving force is resolved, and that gives us our resolution. And we have to have that, right? We need resolution
yes.
of our story, right? We absolutely have to have that. The denouement, which I'm laughing at you do have an excellent pronunciation. I personally have to look up how to spell it every single time. I never get this word spelled correctly. I'm always looking it up before I talk about it. So the denouement is the new world order, right? So the denouement is the story has resolved. The conflict has resolved. The question has been answered. But now we're saying, okay, so how does that impact the character now as they move forward into their new world order? And we don't have to have that. We might have it, but we don't have to have it. We could have a resolution. For example, if you've got a point of view character and that character dies, unless you're going to start writing another point of view, man, that story's over, right?
Yeah.
Or you can write in the afterlife. That story's going to end with the resolution. There is no denouement, right? Yeah, you can do the afterlife. That would be a denouement, what they're experiencing in the afterlife. But I like to think about that the denouement is what happens to the characters as they learn to live with the resolution. So it's the event that happens after the story has been resolved. And so you can think of it as the epilogue, right? An epilogue is almost by its definition a denouement. Now, you might have it not listed as an epilogue. It may just be your last chapter. But an epilogue certainly would lean towards, this is New World Order. This is how the characters are the next day, the next week, the next month, wherever that's located. So it's how they are grappling with the resolution of the story. And that you can have it or not have it. The resolution you got to have.
Yeah.
I love some unhappy readers. That's what I do too.
It was interesting. I just, we can cut this out if it's not interesting, but I was just remembering I don't know, Elena, if you know Jess Lowry, but we were
I know her virtually. I know her virtually. Yeah,
so
I know
we
her
were
through
talking
Facebook
to her, her book, Strange Things.
Wait.
All the things. No.
Nope. It just got a nomination for an award too.
Unspeakable Things.
Unspeakable Things. Yeah.
Down here.
Wonderful title. Wonderful title.
And so she had it, published originally, and she left off the epilogue because she felt like this is the end, and I want people to think, well, she put it on her website, and she had so many people like us that were like, oh, yay, let's go to her website and find out what happens, that she told her publisher, okay, next edition, let's put it back in. Yeah. Because, I think people really love it, but like you said, it's not always necessary, but in certain stories you really want to know.
And some stories you really want to have it. You really do. You want to know what's going to happen. And in other stories, and I don't think this isn't a value judgment. It just varies from book to book. In other stories, you're like, wow, I'm so totally satisfied with the end that I can just think about what might happen next. I don't have to actually see it. I don't need to see the writer's interpretation. But in some, like the story that you're talking about, Jess, it's like, no, we really do need to see that. Like that's that matters enough to us that we want that put in.
Now that you're talking about this, that it is optional, do you think you can generalize standalones versus like series? Do you always need the denouement a series where that character?
Wonderful question. And I will say that one of the things that a denouement can do is, if you are a series writer, it's how you hint or lead into the next book. You might have, so for example, you've resolved the story of that individual book, right? Because every series book has to function like a standalone. But you might have a denouement where, the new client walks in on the PI, or the phone call happens of a murder has taken place, or a body's been found, or whatever. And so it can lead towards the next book. So I think that for a series book, it can really serve that purpose. Again, do you have to have it? No. You can have the book end and you don't know what the next book in the series is going to be until it comes out. Simultaneously, you can have a really great standalone where you're like, I need just a little bit of what's going to happen next. But I do think that it is a great way, it's a great convention for a series writer to pique the interest for readers for the next book. I think it's a savvy move on the part of a series writer to be like, let me dangle this little carrot,
Yeah, that's perfect.
It is. I love that. When Christy and I were talking about doing this topic, I think it was right after your Wednesday morning episode where you guys had talked about this, and Christy was like, I know what we need to talk to Elena about, because you were really excited.
I love that.
I have been working on kind of the dark night of the soul period in my book, and I want to know what your thoughts are about any relationship between that and the ending.
And I loved this. I really put, you had mentioned this and I was like, wow, that is so, like, I've really got to think about this, because I found it such a great question. And so first off, I want to clarify for anybody listening that what we're talking about is sort of this philosophical belief of transitioning into finding greater meaning in your life. And that when we're talking about that dark night of the soul, it's that moment when the character is basically at emotional rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had so many thoughts, and the first was on a very top level, was like, well, yeah, totally, because the climax is when that when that character, that moment where they reach sort of an emotional, this is where I got the stumbling block, rock bottom. Right, that's where I got the stumbling block, because depending on the book that you've got, right, the story that you're telling, it may not be a philosophical sort of emotional rock bottom situation. It could be their moment of greatest danger, but that's not an emotional dark place, right? That's a different kind of climax. So the more I thought about this really wonderful question, the more I thought about it taking on this really broader kind of idea about story structure. So first off, the original thinking about the Dark Night of the Soul was actually from a Roman Catholic. You probably know all this, but actually came from a Roman Catholic perspective, and it was So originally, where it originated, as I understand it, is that it came about the process of connecting to God, and that it has now taken on a broader meaning of finding meaning in life. And so it sort of started out from this kind of religious perspective, and that you had to go through this dark night of the soul, or valley of the inner demons, on your road to, in the Roman Catholic view, getting closer to God, in a larger worldview, finding a broader meaning to life. But that's only a center step. So if you look at the entire process, right, of finding meaning in life, it's sort of these 7 stages: cry for help, initiation, dark night of the soul, distant dawn, stepping into your life's purpose. I'm going to get back to your question here in a minute, but I got just so excited about all this. Finding balance and laying foundations, and the seventh stage was stepping into inner power, or finding that meaning in life. So first off, I got excited about a couple of things. First, I thought was, you could think of a series of books, as being like every one of the steps down this road. Right? So you might have 7 books, and the character is going through each one, right? I know, mind blown, right? And so then I started thinking about, all right, this moment of the darkest night of this particular character, is, I was thinking about how it's possible for that experience to be the character's total arc, right? Is finding meaning in life. and that particular step could happen over and over and over as they're moving through different changes. So every time they have a climax, it is where they reach sort of the greatest danger. But sometimes it could be physical, sometimes it could be emotional, sometimes it could be philosophical. So I think it diverges from the dark night of the soul in that it isn't necessarily their emotional rock bottom, right? I think that's where it's divergent. I think that is a possible scenario, but not all the time. But what I got really excited about was thinking about how applying the whole thing to a novel, right? The whole transition. So you could have either a single book for each step, or you could have all 7 steps in, where what you're talking about, Dark Night of the Soul, that's only halfway through the book. They have to take what they get from that emotional rock bottom and push that towards the climax so that the resolution is actually further down the road. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So anyways, I found the question just so incredibly fascinating. I could see also that the danger of applying it is the idea that every book has to have a life-changing experience for the climax, where the main character then comes out with finding greater meaning in life. And I don't think that's true for every book. I think it can be. I think you can have a book where the character has a life-changing experience, which is what it would be if this is what their climax is going through this dark night of the soul. They hit emotional rock bottom, they go through this experience, they come out on the other side, they are changed in life, and they have found meaning in life. But I want you to think about what that would mean in a series. If you had to do that in every single book, it'd be exhausting. And your poor character.
I was just going to say that poor character would just be a
every
disaster.
3 months, they have a life-changing experience. Like, that doesn't work.
No.
So on a standalone, I think it's great. In a series, I think it's really possible, but it might take place over the entire bulk of the series for them to go through this whole transition or have this deep emotional experience. Or it might not be totally life-changing, but in every book, they're going to hit that place of rock bottom, whatever that means in the particular book, and they're going to come out on the other side. It may not change their life, but it's going to make them understand a certain set of experiences, or it's going to make them take a step forward in their particular journey. So what I came out, the very short answer that I've given now for the last 20 minutes, is I think it is a fantastic tool to apply to your material and say, where is my character in their coming to find meaning in their life? Are they at this place? Are they in their emotional rock bottom? Are they in a place where they've been through that and now they're seeing how to apply that to their world? Are they where they haven't even found their emotional rock bottom yet, and that's going to be in a different book? Like, I think the application of it is fantastic. I just can see it working in so many different ways. So I would say that the concepts are related, but not identical. Does that sort of answer your question?
It does, because I think it frees up. I wasn't sure if if your protagonist is having this life-changing experience, how you would end without a denouement, I guess. I mean, you would to show that,
Right.
It just seems rich, but I want to read the series with the 7 steps that you had to write.
I was like, I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, oh man, I want to write these 7 books. Like, I love this, and the idea of the books where it applies is so exciting. So, but you think about going back to your second question there about, like, do you have to have a denouement for this? And I would say, again, it depends. If you're showing this whole entire arc, right, we may not need a denouement because, man, we've been through this tremendous journey. If we're on one of the steps, we might want that denouement to see how it's leading toward this larger arc. Like I can see both of those being intensely
Mhm.
satisfying. And again, are you the series writer? Read my next book, read my next book, read my next book. Statistically, series writers, they lose readers. They don't gain them, they lose them statistically, because people don't want to start partway through a series and they don't want to read a book that's really old. And so they tend to not add on to a lot of series. And so standalone, yeah, I know it
I'm
feels
very
like it should be
surprised by that.
the other way
Yeah.
around. Everybody thinks it should be the other way around, but unless you've hit it big, your Lee Child or your Sue Grafton, something like that, Sarah Paretsky, unless you are that kind of name, if people see your book as book 4 and they haven't read 1, 2, and 3, they're not going to pick up book 4. And book 1 is probably not sitting on the shelf because it's been out for a couple of years. And so it's challenging as a writer to have these series. It actually can be a little problematic. And so this idea of, you want to have somebody, if they read your book 4, they need to be drawn to book 5, but they also need to want to back up into 1, 2, and 3. So having these all linked together, to me, I'm like, wow, I'm gonna write those 7 stages. I mean, that's just fantastic.
That would be a draw. That makes sense, though, what you were saying, too. Now that I think about it, a lot of books I see nowadays don't tell you that they're part of,
You bet.
they might be like in your case, like a Bet Rivers mystery
Oh,
or
we buried
something.
it. Bet Rivers Mysteries. You bet you can't look at that and know what number it is in the series.
Yeah.
No.
Yep.
And so, because
Yeah.
I'll find a book and I'll be like, ooh, I want to read these in order. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I have to go and find their author's website and look at the publication dates. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, you really got me going on that question, Cathi. I just
so
found
glad.
that whole concept so fascinating and how it plays in with Climax and Denouement. But I think it's so important for writers to really think about, like, what is this dark place that my character is going into, heading into the climax? What am I overcoming? Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's facing a fear. Sometimes there's a lot of different reasons of how characters reach that place, depending on what their super objective is and what their obstacles are and all of that. And so I found that really intriguing as a tool to say, does this fit what I'm working on, and how can I use that?
I love the idea of separating the climax or the resolution in the denouement, and that it's an intentional choice whether you include it or not. And I don't think I'd ever thought about that.
Yeah, that's what really made sense to me. That's why I was like, oh, Cathi, this is really interesting. Like, everybody'd always talk about they would kind of use it interchangeably or whatever, and I would always be like, I don't know, why would there be 2 different words? But
yeah. For me, they really have 2 very different functions, and I think it's useful, and that's why I say this is how I see it and how other people might not. But I think it's a really useful distinction, whatever language you want to apply to it.
Cool. I love that.
So, Elena, did you have an exercise for us to do?
I do. I have 3. But I have 3. And so shall I I'm going to tell you what all 3 are, right?
Okay.
I'll just sort of outline them. Okay, so these are my 3 thoughts for people to apply to works in progress. The first is to take your climax and break it into those 3 parts that I talked about. So can you identify the lead in, the build, and the resolution? And one of the ways that you're going to know, oh, I've got this, is if you can identify where the obstacles are the biggest, the stakes are the highest, and the super objective has become clear, then you know you've got your lead in. Oh, I've got this scene, I have this chapter, I have this moment where, like, that's all coming through. And like from a pace perspective, even in a slower book, there's a pace kind of picks up, there's a greater tension for the reader. It's that moment in the book where they're like, it's 2 a.m, but I have to know how this comes out, right? We all say that, I got to know how this comes out. And that's because your lead in is correct. And identify the build. Like, okay, now that you've got that leading in, are you answering the question that the book has set up? Are you showing how this conflict is going to come out? Then you'll know you've got your build. If you go from lead in to resolution, and we don't have that sort of in the middle, we may not be getting as much of this conflict, this climactic moment that we want. We may want more out of our climax. And then lastly, with that resolution, are we tying up all of the ends that need to be tied up? Right? Because we can have some loose threads, but it can't be any of the big fundamental ones. We got, you got to know if the romantic partner finds the right person. We have to know if the murderer is caught. We have to know if it's a historical event, how it comes out. Like, those are the kinds of things that we have to tie up. We can leave other things open. We don't have to tie everything up, but in that resolution, do all the big things get tied up? And if you have those three parts, then you have a successful climax. So that's number one. Break your climax into.
I always love a successful climax.
Right? Don't we all? Number two, identify the big question to the story and see if your resolution answers it.
Ooh.
If you do, you're allowed to write a denouement. If you don't, then you don't get to write your denouement because you have not finished your resolution.
That has not been a satisfying
That's
climax.
not been a satisfying climax. You have failed, right, to hit your climax. So really clarify for yourself, what's the big question, and does the resolution answer it? And if the answer is, well, I don't know the big question that the book is asking, then I think you need to do a little more work in understanding what your through line is, what your spine is, what your character is really after. And so it's a great place to sort of say, have I done this, and is it answered? And then number three, no matter whether you need it or not, write a denouement.
Oh, that's a great exercise.
And if you love it, tack it on. And if you don't love it, don't need it, right? But write one regardless. And then make a choice whether or not you want to keep it.
Wonderful. I'm frantically writing notes.
I'm
Okay,
too,
I'm gonna
and
do this exercise.
I'm trying to think
I have a
of
quick question, and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be silly, but can you have multiple climaxes in a book?
I
Like,
love
if
this
you-
question. And I'm going to give you an answer that always amuses me. A friend of mine who's a wonderful, wonderful playwright had written a play which didn't follow traditional story structure. It had multiple climaxes. And she was getting some feedback. I was in the room, and she was getting some feedback from a director. And he starts cracking up. And he goes, when I read this, I thought there's way too many climaxes in this play. And he says, and then I started thinking about that, that's kind of a male way to think about things, that you can only have one climax, which I found just hilarious, because it was a very successful play. Here's how I would respond to that question. I think you need to have your big question asked at the opening, early on, first chapter, second chapter, early on, what's the big question? And I think you need to answer that in your biggest climax at the end. In between those, you can have resolutions for smaller questions, right?
Mhm.
You can have what feels like kind of a climactic event, in that, like, we've really been driving through, like, who did commit the crime. That may be driving us, right? But the ultimate climax is catching the killer, right? That's where the big climax is. But you might have this sort of climactic scene where your detective, oh my gosh, I this event happens, and it's all clear to me who the killer is. Great. That can feel slightly climactic, but it's not the big question of the book. If the big question is, will they be brought to justice? So that your big climax at the end. So I think you can have sort of, if you think about structure, if you think of story structure as doing this, you can kind of have these tiny little climaxes, but they're building up to that one answering that big question. If you have a big question and it's answered halfway through the book, you have a problem.
Yeah.
Right? You have a different problem, which is you
people
either
are probably
need
going to put the book down pretty quick,
right?
after that.
You either have to have a bigger question, and that one is only part one, or you've got to push that answer, that resolution, out to the end, because the climax and the resolution, the big one really has to happen at the end of the book, because that's why we feel satisfied.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So think of it more in terms of size.
Wonderful.
This is a great conversation.
I know. I know, and we're not even drinking.
I
is
was
our
going to say
non-drinking
something about we need
podcast.
some wine.
And
No.
say, now I need some wine after all that.
We're trying to be real studious here and drinking our coffee and tea. Anyway, I think this has been wonderful, this conversation.
It's
don't you,
wonderful.
Cathi?
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to clarify things for a lot of our listeners like it did us.
Oh, yeah.
And on top of that, Elena is offering a first chapter critique to one lucky listener.
Wow.
So
That is
yeah,
big
we'll have the contest stuff on our website and put it out on social media. But that's so nice, Elena,
Oh,
because
you're welcome.
honestly,
It is.
she's
Thank
awesome.
you.
She's awesome.
Yeah, Elena, how can we, what's the easiest way for listeners to find your classes like Christie's been taking? And I've taken a few, but I haven't been as steady as a student of Christie.
But I always love having both of you there. Yes,
you.
the best way to find them, you can go to Eventbrite, which is just eventbrite.com, and look up allegory editing. And that'll take you right to where you can register. You can also always shoot me an email, which you can find on my website, which is www.elenataylorauthor.com, Taylor, Taylor, author.com. And I have contact information there. You can shoot me an email and say, hey, I really would like to join your workshops. And I can send you the link. But we do have it set up. They're all on Zoom, but we have it set up through Eventbrite so people can sign up and I can send out emails and information. It just makes it a little bit easier. So you can find me on Eventbrite as well.
And that's how you can also, you can also hire Elena or Allegory for your editing purposes. She even does short stories, and I guarantee you, she knows her stuff. And
I think anybody listening to our conversation today is going to know what an amazing resource Elena is.
Exactly.
All right, we went off script big time. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, that's okay. So we're gonna, I got a little. I don't know if you guys noticed. Everybody out there, if you heard the dogs next door were barking, people were banging around in the hallway. I was like,
oh my goodness,
what's going on? I'm thinking of Elena earlier saying she likes to
why
have both headphones. I
on.
wish I did, because I was like, I don't want to hear this.
Can't hear the dogs.
Yeah.
But anyway, we really want to thank you for being our guest.
For sure.
In this Words in Progress series. And we're planning on doing these every month so that writers can get out there and exercise their craft. So
mostly I just want to have these conversations because they're so fun.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.
And let's see, what else do we have to say?
We're going to do the giveaway, right? We're going to do a giveaway of the CD. So I have I have a CD.
I didn't know about this. How come I didn't know about this?
It was in her email.
You didn't read the email.
It was in her emails. So this is the book, and Elena we're going to give away a CD of this, so you can listen to it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we will.
Right. I was like, I already have the book and read it, so maybe I just ignored that part. But that's awesome.
It is a great novel. It's a great novel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Page
a wonderful
Turner.
read.
We're looking for the next one.
Yes.
We're not going to say which one it is in the series.
I hope to have news soon.
Really?
Oh, good.
We will share that with everybody. So
I hope so. Yeah.
Next time we have to do this with wine. I'm just saying we really.
I'm on board. A little bit of wine, multiple climaxes, wine.
We'd be good.
There we go.
I think that's a recipe for a very successful podcast. I'm just saying.
I like it.
Yes.
All right. Well, with our water and tea, we should say cheers. Thanks, Elena.
Cheers, Elena. Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you so much for having me.